thank you everyone who joined us and for your interest in the Global Sustainability Challenge. I'll start by introducing myself, and then I'm going to take you through a bit of a presentation about the adaptation and resilience theme, and then finish with a little bit of context about how that fits into the Global Sustainability Challenge and what the next steps might be for you. You'll notice that the slides are extremely detailed, and it's with thanks to colleagues at some of our partner universities who provided these slides. They're extremely detailed, and that's partly because they're meant to be a resource that you can use and follow up on as you're investigating adaptation and resilience as a potential theme for your entry to the Global Sustainability Challenge. And so because of that, there's a lot more detail than we can possibly cover in the slightly under an hour we have this morning. So please don't be intimidated by that. So, as you all know, for the first time, led by the Stanford University team, but together with a number of partner universities, including myself at Imperial College London, we're running a competition for students, undergraduates, masters, postgraduate students all around the world to try and... My name is Alyssa Gilbert, and I'm the Director of Innovation for the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment at Imperial College London. And Imperial College is a topic partner for this challenge, which means that we're helping to provide a little bit of support and advice on the specific topic of adaptation and resilience, which has been chosen as two of the main focus areas for this year's inaugural year of the Global Sustainability Challenge. So to help you get going on this challenge, we wanted to give you a bit of introduction to the theme and some ideas about where you might play in both the problem space and some ideas of solutions that are out there. It's an incredibly broad topic. Already, sustainability is a really broad topic. But even when you start to crack open a specific sub-area, like adaptation and resilience, you find that there's so much more there to talk about. This year, what we decided to do, as well as looking at the topic of adaptation and resilience, we decided to give you a flavor of a particular sub-area. And in this case, our focal point is water. And the reason why we've done that is to give you a chance to have a look at some more case studies and dive a little bit more deeply into where our ability to adapt to the environmental change, the climate change, and the other kinds of environmental challenges we're seeing around us. There's lots of ways that we can adapt to that, and lots of ways that we can prepare and make ourselves more resilient for those impacts and those changes. However, it's much easier to frame that within a particular problem area or problem space. And for that, we've decided to choose water. And that's because water is a good touch point for climate and environmental challenges. Water is vital to all of us. And when we have changing patterns of water or rainfall, it can affect us through drought. It can affect us through flooding. And those things have important knock-on effects to humans, to people, to our assets, to our livelihoods, but also to the natural environment and natural assets and biodiversity. And all of those are impacts that different people care about. Also, whilst we've called this broadly a sustainability challenge, we can see how climate change is affecting our water, but also how other human activity, such as the overuse in some cases of fertilizers, is affecting the waterways that we have around us and having those same knock-on impacts, again, on people, physical assets, and natural assets around us. So as you can see in the slide here, we can see that climate change is already resulting in a number of hazards that can impact us across those all three areas. And the real question is, how can we help ourselves manage and adapt to these changes, prepare for them, and also deal with those impacts effectively? So I'm going to go through a little bit of a description of the challenge, but then as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can get started on the Global Sustainability Challenge and show you a little bit of the resources that we've got available for you. And then I'll finish by going through the time frame so that you can know exactly what to expect as we go forward. As I was saying, water is an essential part of everything that we need. And some of the things that we're seeing affecting water around us is our changing patterns that we know are caused by climate change. And we're starting to see those happen already. So with the changing climate, we see changes in precipitation patterns. And particularly that can mean in some places, in some parts of the world, much less precipitation than you need, a change in distribution over time, and that can affect things like managing crops or actual crop yields, and in some cases crop failures. We've also seen that because of changing climate, some storms whilst not necessarily changing in frequency, can actually change in how heavy they are. And that changes the amount of damage that they can cause. And being ready to be prepared for those is really important. In parallel, as I said, there's other kinds of human behavior that relate to the water and the water cycle that can also be causing kind of environmental sustainability challenges. In particular, human land use change, human-caused land use change, often for vital reasons, so making farmland more available for food production, or in some cases, because there's water stress, over-extraction of water, and making those resources less available in the future. All of these things can increase water stress. And this area is a vital area to think about. What we've shown on the slide here on the right-hand side is how just dealing with water actually has huge implications and an interrelationship with other things that are important to us. And as I said, those things can be about the natural world, and that relates to SDG 14 and 15, so life on land and life in our oceans and our rivers. But it also obviously relates to food production, water being a vital part of food production. And of course, some of those causal factors, the important use of fertilizers to increase yields, the important availability of land for agriculture, all of these are very interrelated, and therefore the hunger goal is relevant. And then there are, of course, sustainable development goals directly related to water. Some of those are about availability of water, but we also have things about the availability of clean water and how those can feed sustainable cities and communities. So the water is really deeply, obviously, interrelated into all of those things that we need, both for humans and for nature. Water stress is increasing rapidly, and here's a map you can see from 2023 that shows you where there's water-stressed regions of the world, and they're really widespread all around the world. And you can see also, related to some of those SDGs, how some water-related or water-adjacent issues are actually causing problems across those SDGs. And this is relevant kind of in whichever part of the world you are. So here I am in the UK, and I know that we are often quite heavily affected by flooding, and that's been the case for a long time. But what we see is with changed precipitation patterns combined with changed patterns of heat, what you can get is prolonged periods of dryness. And then when the rain falls, it's not able to be absorbed in the same way that it used to be in the past. Similarly, as with this example that's given here of Denmark, some of our societies and cities in Western Europe, both cities and agricultural patterns, are designed for certain kinds of patterns of rainfall. And whilst we're seeing changes, we're in a period where we have to decide how we're going to manage and deal with these impacts. Plenty of these reasons, of these impacts I've put up here already. You can imagine parts of the world where you have drought-prone impacts, so irregular rainfall can lead to crop failure, groundwater depletion, et cetera, and sometimes places can become drought-prone or temporarily have these experiences of drought-proneness, even where they might not have considered themselves a drought-prone region. For example, in 2003, we could see crop failures in France that were, to a certain extent, linked from extremely hot weather, as well as precipitation pattern changes that hadn't been seen before, and you wouldn't have necessarily considered those agricultural regions of France as being drought-prone. Obviously, I was just talking previously about flood-prone regions where you can get very heavy rainfalls that can lead to impacts that might be different in rural and urban areas. And certainly you can get storm surges in urban areas that can be very damaging in a city context. One of the key things I mentioned was the seasonal variability of rain. And so you can get within one season dry periods and wetter periods with a kind of more volatile rain patterns. But you also do get parts of the world where you have extreme flood and extreme drought. So for some parts of the region, there's natural variability that people have been managing for some time. But in some places, this is quite a change, or we're in the context of something changing. When we're talking about flood-prone areas, we've also got here the urban areas. And of course, we see an interrelationship between the hazard, what we call the hazard itself, which would be the rainfall or the higher temperatures, and the existing infrastructure. And that is also an area where you might want to think about adaptation and resilience. So in some places, where you might have older infrastructure, that might be a problem. In some places, you might have no infrastructure. In some cases, it's designed for a different capacity. And in some cases, it's just not fit for purpose at all. So if you look across here, the strategies that you can use, there's quite a number of different solutions that are possible in these different contexts and to create resilience and enable adaptation to these changes or to these existing stresses that may have existed before. And there's a lot of examples of where perhaps some solutions have been applied in one context or one part of the world, but never tried somewhere else, or that it's already available in a small part of one city or one region, but needs expansion, acceptance, etc. So sometimes what we're looking for in terms of innovation here might be a new solution and might be an existing solution applied better, applied more broadly, or it might be a solution imported from somewhere else in the world, or it might be some kind of intervention that enables an existing solution to be used more effectively. So there's lots of different places to play. And if you look across the strategies and the solutions, hopefully, regardless of what kind of background or experience you have or areas knowledge you already have or are interested in, there's something here for everybody. So we've got this big range between conservation techniques like ecosystem restoration, biological or molecular biology techniques like plant breeding, more engineering techniques with flood barriers or different kinds of water storage, green infrastructure, and so on, but also some things that could be done maybe more with software tools, early warning systems that use existing data sets and make them available for people. And amongst all of these things, when you're looking at your challenge, one of the things that it is a continuing challenge for people operating in all of these fields is how to make these solutions work for people and how to engage with the audiences that need to implement these solutions effectively. What you can see at the bottom, of course, is that as well as these strategies, there are international, regional, intercommunity challenges that also need to be managed. You might not want to be embarking on immediately a diplomatic mission as part of your entry point to the global sustainability challenge. But depending on what region in the world you are and what context you're in, you might have some different ideas about solutions where you can make a difference. Here's the challenge. Help us solve some parts of this different emerging water crisis, perhaps as relevant to your context or a technical area that you have an emerging understanding of. So we're looking for you to develop a solution that enhances the resilience and ability of perhaps one of those categories I described, people, nature, or physical assets, to withstand and adapt to or manage the changing impacts that we're having on water in our environment. Now, I will say that although we've chosen water as the theme, if you have some other area of adaptation and resilience to climate and environmental challenges that you would like to submit, we're absolutely open to that. The reason we've chosen water is to just help you, as I've said, deep dive, have a little bit more perspective on one issue. There's a real range of solutions, as I said. Some of those might be about disaster preparedness, water security. Some of those might be technical solutions, as I said, human-facing solutions, policy solutions, social approaches. This is broad, huge, right? So I'm hoping that I'm giving you both a flavor of the challenge, so some specificity, but also the idea that you can actually expand your idea in a place that you already are interested in. So if you're now thinking, all right, it's overwhelming, there's lots of options and ideas here, but I would like to get involved. How do I get involved? And many of you may have already signed up for the challenge itself. I'll tell you a little bit more now about how to get started. So I'll get on to the kind of practical aspects of getting started, signing up for the challenge, etc. in a second. But this is how to get started with organizing your ideas, because I've gone quite broad and I've told you a lot of things in a short space of time. So when you're thinking through a problem, it's really important to make sure that you understand the problem in quite a lot of detail. So I've given you a broad overview, but for example, if you got interested in urban flood management, the next step would be to try and understand more deeply what that means. And if you're going to focus in on a particular local area, then start by understanding your local context or your community, if that's appropriate. If not, you can start with some desk-based research, some literature review, or perhaps speaking to some experts that you know from your institution, and really dive into the problem. For many of these problems, you might say, look at all these solutions I've presented. There's loads of answers already, but actually the problem still exists and persists, and we need many innovators and active problem solvers to get out there and help us solve the problem. So don't be put off by saying, oh, I've looked at the problem, loads of people understand the problem, and loads of people have solutions. This is your chance to think about where you can implement a solution and make real change happen. There's just not enough, even though you'll think there are a lot of people solving these problems, not enough people actually taking action to do these practical things. So don't be put off. So spend a bit of time understanding the problem and understanding the problem, the context that's local to you or where you think you can add a difference. When you've understood the broad problem, the next step we usually advise is to really define your problem statement really specifically. So we're looking for you then to solve a sub part of this bigger problem area you've been exploring. Now, usually when we work with people on innovation, what I find is that people come at it with a great idea. So they're actually usually starting on maybe number 4 or 5. You come to probably think, oh, water. I know I've got this great idea about water that's really relevant. I'm going to start at number 4. I want to encourage you to hold back ever so slightly, even if it's just for a few days or a week, to allow yourself to explore the problem a little bit more broadly and really test whether that's the solution or the idea that you think is best, and allow yourself to understand the problem really well, so that even if you do choose to go for your first solution that you've come up with, you're actually tailoring it to the problem as you've understood it as best as possible. When we work with innovators at our institution at Imperial College, one of the most important things is that people who are innovators, they're maybe starting a startup or a not-for-profit, spend as much time as possible speaking to the people with a problem and understanding again and again whose problem, which problem are they solving, what is the detail of the problem, so that they can get the solution to fit. The idea in your head may well be brilliant, but you want to apply it as best as possible to the problem, and you therefore need to understand the problem in as much detail as possible. So I cannot encourage you enough to spend time defining the problem and understanding the problem as much as you can before you go on to fun brainstorming and innovate idea and creating those solutions. And those solutions, as I said, can be building on great examples you may have seen while exploring the problem space that you just don't think have been applied in a way that works best, or in a way that works best for your context or your community. And so you'll add your own flavor to that to make it original. Once you've got your solution, test it, develop it a little bit further, prototype it. So if it's a physical solution, kind of have a go at making it. If it's a policy solution, see if there's a trusted person you can run it by who has experience to understand and give you feedback. And then really, if you feel ready, think about how that might land in a different part of the world, or how it might scale up for the biggest impact possible. So this is quite a fun part. And we're asking you to work in groups. And so this is also a moment through all of these activities to be really open, bringing in the ideas of other people in your group and using that to strengthen your ideas. What we've done is provided some solutions for you. And these materials are all available via the Global Sustainability Challenge website. What we tried to do was give you some examples of solutions that people have put into place from different parts of the world that all relate to water. So you can see here several that are related to community awareness or a data platform on water and water quality. You can see that there's actual purification technologies and one to help reduce the kind of availability of the use of water in a sanitation context. So there's quite a lot of nice examples here that you can use as inspiration, and that show that young people like you who are trying to approach a sustainability challenge, there's great impacts that you can have. We've got some examples here, and I don't want to dive into them in too much detail here, because otherwise there might be a temptation for you to say, oh yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to do something about AI's water usage. You may want to do that, but do feel free to think broader. So the idea of these examples is just to be able to think in a little bit more detail about a problem. This example here is about how can we collect rainwater. And again, it depends a little bit on different parts of the world, but one of the problems that I said to you, one of the kind of challenges we're seeing is changing rainfall patterns. And what that means is that sometimes there can be enough water that falls, enough rainfall, but actually it's just not available at the right times to be used in the right quantities for things like agriculture or for other sort of more local uses, which might be, in your area might be local gardens. And then when people use the water at those other times for those uses, they're not available for some of the important, for example, agricultural needs. So looking at kind of the rainforest harvesting in the context that you're in can be something that you can do to help people adapt. And that may be in a rural context, thinking about how water is stored, natural water is stored in a region or in a water basin or in a rural, like sort of farm context. Or it could be about thinking about how that happens in an urban setting. How can you encourage people to, for example, use water butts to collect rainfall off their roofs in different contexts? And how could that be made useful for them? What kind of water quality is required can be helpful in those contexts. We've seen, particularly in the past year, the increased use of artificial intelligence in many parts of the world and concerns about the impacts that growing artificial intelligence will have, particularly on energy demand and on water use. And again, that's something that you could look at in more detail, understand the problem. And this is an interesting problem because it's really emerging and the technology is changing and the demand is likely to change in the future. But really look at what's happening now, this really live area, try and understand how it's relevant to your part of the world and what you might be able to do about it in that local context. And how you can, this is an interesting area where thinking about how the conversation that you could prompt or the example that you could make could have a really big impact globally on an area that's really changing very rapidly. And the third example that we have here is about extreme event prediction. That was one of the examples we had already about how young people were making a difference to people in a local context by providing weather warnings. And there's a lot of people looking at different kinds of warnings that could be useful. Lots of data sets that could be used already for predictive tools. And sometimes people can innovate around the interface or also the awareness of these tools and these challenges and what can be used. And I found, speaking to innovators from different parts of the world, that it's the people from the communities where you need to use this information that can actually help most with creating solutions. So being close to the users. So again, here's a place where you can really understand what the current risks are, the measurements and the prediction that's available, but also really importantly, speaking to those people who are, for example, small business holders or farmers or residents who are being affected by this and understand what they really need. What decisions do they make and how would they access this information and what decisions would they make differently rather than making assumptions about those things. It's really important for these kind of very directly people or business facing tools. So 3 very different areas that you could think about here and 3 of many. So as I said, please don't be restricted by that, but use some of this information here as inspiration for you to think about that process of understanding the problem, speaking to the people it affects, and starting to come up with and then test those solution ideas that you have. So here's the timetable of what we're doing now. So we've had the launch already, and many of you have already signed up for the challenge itself. We're asking people to all register by the middle towards the end of October. I don't have this exact deadline, but we can go and check it up. This is the moment for you to form your teams and start thinking about, about the problem statement and coming up with solutions and mocking up that idea. And in November, we'll have a deadline for those first kind of ideas. But you'll have if you're chosen for the second phase, you'll have the opportunity to build out and test and develop your idea further and refine your solution for the regional finals. And so there's this kind of 2-phased approach. And the first phase approach, we're asking you to come up with these kind of higher level ideas that you can pitch to us. And then there'll be the opportunity for the global finale at the end. So there'll be some regional competitions and then a global final that's planned for April. And there are some cash prizes for the teams that do the best in the competition. So it's worth making an effort. So that's the process as it is. And I'll encourage you to go to the website directly to find the exact dates and ways for submitting your ideas. So here is the website itself. If you sign up here on the portal, fill out the questions that you're asked here and so on. And there's more information there on all of those dates. We will ask you then to, in phase 2, then there's a live 5-minute pitch at the regionals, and then there'll be a pitch also at the global final if you pass through. So that's the basic phases. You can sign up for the challenge as you're building your team. So you don't have to sign up and immediately have everything ready, including your problem statement, etc. There's a platform there that you can sign up and start building your solution from there. And thanks, Chloe, for putting in the chat the link there to the program guide that will give you all the more specific details. As with any competition, and I know we get asked this a lot, especially when we're doing student assignments as well, what are the criteria? That's obviously going to be quite important to you. And so here are the criteria that we're using. So the problem definition and relevance, which, I've been emphasizing in this discussion today, is really important. So it's got to be clear to us that you identified and understood a problem, and you have at least engaged at some point, both in a wide range of research, but particularly getting insight from the users or the stakeholders who will be relevant. And you've had a little bit of a think about the local context and perhaps global scaling. So the problem and its relevance is really important. We're interested also in the innovation itself. Is it innovative? And as I said before, being innovative doesn't always mean coming up with a new technology. It can be applying a solution that already exists somewhere else. It can be applying it better. It can be really connecting, basically, your understanding of the user's needs and the problem statement effectively to the solution that you have. We're looking for originality, though, and we are looking for how you've brought different ideas and things together. These solutions can be quite like a micro level, right? You could come up with a small widget that helps solve kind of water storage, or you could come up with something that's a very large policy. It's not about scale of the idea here, but it's about how you're coming up with something interesting and original that solves a specific problem that you can show evidence that you've identified. There's a criteria for feasibility and execution. So there is that phase where we've encouraged you to test your ideas with people, see whether your solution actually has any legs, and actually, if you're making something, test it, build it, and see whether it's possible. So we're looking for you to have tried it out and why you think that you still think it can work out. What's the impact it can have? This is a global sustainability challenge. So your idea, it could be all of these things. It could be solving a problem. It could be innovative. It could be feasible. But really also we're looking for something that has a sustainability impact. So we want you to be able to say why it's going to make a difference. Why is it going to help solve one of these challenges that we've seen here? And finally, we're looking for good communication. So how are you telling the story? Is it persuasive and clear and engaging? Getting that right level of detail? What have you provided us with to help tell that story? So those are the criteria. And again, these are also available on the overall website. So thank you. That's all from me. I've been talking for a long time. Thank you to those of you who've hung on. Happy to answer some questions if you want to put them in the Q&A box. Yeah, thanks for your question. There aren't limits to where you get your team from. I think you just need to think about what's practical. Timeframes are quite short in a way for what we're asking people to do. And so it could be easier for you to work with people that you already know or people already at in your own area, your own university or institution that it's easier to form a relationship with just because you're in the same time zone. You may be able to explore the same problem. However, there are no limitations. So if you're interested in joining a team with a few young people from all different parts of the world, then please go ahead and do that. And that could yield something it could be that's what gives you the inspiration for something much more creative. We don't have a minimum number in mind of the people that you speak to, because also it's quite difficult for some of these areas, as we're saying. If you've got an innovative policy solution, you want to speak to someone who's engaged in policy making, it might be quite difficult for you to get access to some of those people. So it may be that a deeper conversation with just one or two people, perhaps one person working in a policy making environment in a civil service role and someone at a sort of lobby group or environmental NGO, that might be sufficient to give you that insight to take your idea to the next level. So it's not about number of people. Similarly, you just need to be thinking about whether you've got how wide a range of perspectives you have that give you the confidence to move on to the next step of your idea. That's why it's quite helpful to, as much as you can, start broad, but then when you've narrowed down to a specific problem statement, then that should narrow down the wide range of people that you want to speak to. You should be asking yourself the question, have I spoken to enough people to feel like I'm starting to understand this group? Another way to also validate your ideas, especially at that very early research stage, is in some cases there'll be surveys that have been done by other people of the groups that you're looking at. And that can really help you understand in broad terms at a high level what the concerns or the perspectives are of that group without you also having to go and speak to or access a very large number of people. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea. In the first point of things to do, we also said, do think local. So think about, while you're coming up with solutions, it's also maybe good to think about who you have the best access to. That might help you be most successful also in that phase. Any other questions? Okay, so someone put in the chat a question about group size. I would say, like, an ideal group size is 3 to 5 people. I'm just thinking about the kind of experiences that we've had working with groups of innovators before. You want a number of people so that you're sharing ideas and you're learning from each other, and that you can also share the workload because all of you are doing many other things at the same time. But you don't want so many people that you're holding an enormous meeting every time and it's difficult to reach agreement and you have too many people motivated by different things to work together. You want to avoid your main focus being on team dynamics, and you want to be able to have a group that can move forward effectively eventually in one clear direction. So I would say 3 to 5. Thank you everyone for joining. Good luck with the challenge. I hope you sign up.